All right, we're looking at a 2004 MDX Acura, I believe. It's got the 3.5 Honda engine in it, and the problem is it's got misfires on all the cylinders. I don't know if it's picking it up. Basically, go down the line: 301, 302, 303, 304, 305, 306, and 300. Now, this guy had just bought this car, and someone before him put all new coil packs on it, plugs, the normal thing that people do when they got a misfire. The thing is, on all 6 cylinders, and at first I thought maybe it had a lean misfire, maybe like a vacuum leak or something like that, but the fuel trims are right on where they should be. So I asked him when the last time the valves have been changed. He said he doesn't think they've ever not changed, but adjusted. He called the guy that owned it before him. Car's got 200 and about 30,000 miles on it. That guy never had it done. So it's possible that this engine is at 230,000 with ever having the valves adjusted. Or at the most, it's been adjusted one time. You're supposed to adjust about every 120,000 on this engine. So it's possible that they were adjusted once and that was it. And now we're at 230. My guess is probably haven't ever been adjusted. I'm not sure, but it has kind of a rough idle. But other than that, it runs fine. Like, you can't feel the misfires once you get off of idle. It goes through the gears fine, and it seems pretty smooth. Its biggest problem is just the idle aspect of it. I smoked it last week real quick, and there was a real faint hint of smoke coming from the back. And I couldn't tell if it was coming from the valve cover or from the intake manifold, the upper intake. But it was so faint that I kind of doubt that would cause 6-cylinder misfire, all 6 cylinders. I could be wrong, but either way, really the only way to check the valves is to tear it down and get in there. I've heard of people using a transducer, pressure transducer, and being able to do that. I don't have that. That may be something I invest in later, but that's really the only way I can think of to really know if. And on these Hondas, the intakes usually are within spec. It's the exhaust valves that tighten up. And what I mean by tighten up is the valve will actually stay open longer because the gap between your rocker and the valve closes down on them. So your exhaust valve is opening sooner and then closing later than what it's supposed to. And that's what causes the misfire and the rough idle. So, and it's not a super rough idle, but it's noticeable. And just my experience with Hondas, a lot of times when you have a rough idle like that, multiple cylinder misfire, a lot of times the valves have not been adjusted forever. So regardless, if I believe that's what the problem is, just from experience, regardless if that fixes the whole problem or not, it needs to be done. Because if you let it go too long, you can end up pulling that valve up through the seat so far that it burns the valve in the seat. And you definitely don't want that. Then you're pulling the head off and all that. So hopefully we're not to that point on this. I don't think we are, because it's still, once you get off idle, it runs great. Or it doesn't run great, but it runs really good. So anyway, I think we're to the point where we just need to adjust them. Regardless of any other diagnostics, that needs to be the base where I start with it. Just because someone's already done a bunch of the little stuff. There's new throttle body gasket on there. There's new, like I said, coil packs all around, the whole 9 yards. So where I'm going to start with it is adjust the valves. It needs to be done, and that'll eliminate that. So I'm not going to go step by step. I'll kind of show you what I'm doing until we get down to the actual valves, and then I'll show you how to do that. There's other videos out there, but none on Hoopties, so we're going to go ahead and make one real quick. So the first thing we'll do is just remove this engine cover and the air intake housing, and then we'll start removing the upper intake manifold on it and go from there. If you're going to do this job, it'd be a good idea to get new valve cover gaskets and new upper intake gaskets. There's 2 gaskets on the upper intake. There's a plenum in there, and then there's 2 gaskets on each side. They're kind of pricey, to be honest with you. I think I saw like $80 for 2 gaskets. The valve covers I don't think are that bad, but for whatever reason the plenum gaskets are pretty expensive. So if you know you're going to do this job ahead of time, it might be a good idea maybe to shop online or something. I'm not saying go and get some real cheap gaskets, but I don't know. They're making some pretty good money off these 2 little plenum gaskets for $80. So that's up to you. But if something like this that you know that you're going to do ahead of time, I would just probably try to source them online somewhere. They are reusable to a certain point, but this car's got 200, like I said, 30,000 miles on it. I don't know if it's been replaced or not, if someone tried that. So I'm going to pull it off and take a look at them and make a judgment call from there. But if you know yours has never been changed, that's the 2 things that I would change while you're doing this job is your valve cover gaskets and your intake gaskets. So I'm going to go and start getting some tools ready, and we'll start tackling this job. Alright, so I went ahead and took that engine cover off. Took off the air intake here and took off most of what I can see on the throttle body. I always need a throttle body on the intake. I think the plenum gasket comes with a new throttle body gasket. If it does, I'll go ahead and take it off later. There is 2 small coolant hoses on these throttle bodies that you'll have to remove. You'll lose a little bit of coolant, but nothing to go crazy over. And then we'll I think I got most of everything on the intake disconnected. I'm sure I missed something, but I'm going to go ahead and take this top plate off. That's how you get to the bolts that hold the plenum on, or the upper intake. Bunch of bolts, and then this is where all your intake bolts are at to remove the intake. So I'm going to go ahead and pull those off. I do have one line here, and it looks like I got another electrical connector right there, and then this thing should pull off. I think I'm pretty sure I got everything. So let me get tool set up. We'll see if this thing pulls off. Alright, so that upper plenum plate is 10 mil. These are all 12 mil. Normally I just leave them in there. There's a couple 10 in there. Tight one. Alright. I'm still hooked to something here. So I got one more hose and then I should be clear. I'm going to go ahead and pull that hose off, and then we'll pull this manifold off and start getting down to the nitty gritty. Alright, so I got that off, and I'm looking at these gaskets here in this plenum and the plenum spacer, and they look original, so I'm not going to take a chance. I'm going to go ahead and replace them. Like I said, when I smoked it last week, when I was just checking it out, there was real faint bit of smoke coming from in this area, and the only thing in this area would be the plenum gasket or possibly the valve cover leaking. I know, believe it or not, sometimes the valve cover leak on these Hondas can cause misfires. It sounds kind of crazy, but I've seen it. So I'm going to go ahead and replace these. And like I said, these are like $80. I can't believe it, but it comes with the throttle body gasket and a bunch of other crap. So I think it comes with the block offs for the manifold, for the EGR passages and all that stuff. So I still don't think it's worth $80 for 2 of these, but we'll replace it because the goal here is to make this car run good. So what I do, I'm going to move this off to the side. And this has two gaskets, obviously, one on the base, on the intake, and then you got the plenum spacer, and then this. I'm going to go ahead and put some tape or something and cover up these holes. I don't want anything falling down there and having to pull the intake manifold off. So, considering we're going to be working on the back side of the engine, adjusting valves, and the front side, there's a high chance that a bolt or anything can fall down in there if we don't plug it off. So I'm going to go ahead and get some tape and plug off that, cover up these intake holes, and then we'll probably start pulling the coils off and that wiring harness out of the way. And we can pull the valve covers and get down to it. So anyway, I'm going to cover those holes up and then we'll pick back up. Alright, so you can see here I got the valve covers off and the wiring harness. Mainly when you're doing the valve covers and all that, you're just going to be taking off a bunch. There's not a whole lot to show you. There's only 5 bolts to hold the valve covers on the engine. But there's all kinds of wiring harnesses and connectors and little brackets and clips and stuff you have to take off. There's no way I can show you all that. Just just follow the trail and unhook things as you go. I did take off the power steering pump, loosen it. There's 2 bolts to hold that on. I blocked off the return line. It's a return line. There's not really much going to come out of there, but I still blocked it off. And I took a bungee cord. You can't remove this wiring harness on this side. Now on the front you can. It's right here. You can move that completely out of the way and get full access. And then on the back side, which is the harder side, Honda made it to where you can't remove the harness at all because it goes down over the transmission in all kinds of weird places. So I just took a bungee cord and suspended it out of the way. Should be plenty of room in there to do what you have to do. So now we're to this point where we're ready to adjust the valves. I'm going to go ahead. You have to jack the car up, take the passenger side wheel off, and then there's a hole in the fender well to give you access to the 19mm bolt for the crankshaft. And you have to turn that to the number on the camshaft sprocket. And I'll show you that once I get it set up. So I'm going to pull the wheel off and get that. There's a little window on the camshaft timing belt cover. And you just pull that off or open it. And there's a number on the sprocket. And you just turn it, and that's the one. That is the cylinder that you adjust. So I'll show you that. It's a pretty important step. And then we'll go about adjusting. We'll do the intake and exhaust on one head or one cylinder, and then I'll go ahead and do the rest of them off camera, and then we'll put it back together, clear the codes, and see what happens. But yeah, I'll show you. I'll pull the wheel off now, and I'll show you all that real quick. All right, after you get the wheel off, you'll see a hole right here in your inner housing. Put a 19mm socket through there until you feel your crankshaft bolt. And that's what you're going to use to turn the engine over. You're going to bar it over by hand and line up your crankshaft pulley to where it needs to be for each cylinder that you're going to adjust. So I'll show you up top how that's what you're lining up and how you know which cylinder it is. All right, so I got this printed out for you. Honda. This is I'm facing the car. And I got this printed. I got this facing the same way the engine's facing. This is the front of the engine, and on these 3.5s, the front of the engine is the passenger side. You got the transmission on the driver's side. So the way Honda does it is 1, 2, 3 in the back, and then 4, 5, 6, kind of like Ford and those guys do it. And then on here, I got it written down. The intake, you want to go 8 to 9 thousandths of an inch on the intake valves, and on the exhaust, it's 11 to 13 thousandths of an inch. Is how you're going to adjust those. So once you got your socket through the crankshaft and everything's, you're ready to turn it. You want to turn your engine clockwise, and you're going to see this plug right here. You're going to remove that, and then there's a tab right here on the cover itself, and you're going to line that up. Let's see if I can get you down in there. Right now it's if I can get a good angle on that. Let me try to get a better angle on it real quick, and then I don't know if I can get you down in there, things. But let me try to get a better angle, and then I'll show you what I'm talking about. Alright, so I'm hoping this shows up. I got as close as I can get this camera to that hole. And I don't know if you can see there. Having technical difficulties with this. There's a 1 on that camshaft sprocket, and it's lined up with that plastic tab. You'll see it on yours. Maybe you can see it right there. I can kind of see it in the viewfinder. That slash is a 1. And so that means you'll adjust. If you got it lined up on the 1, then you'll adjust the number 1 cylinder, which on Hondas would be the number 1 would be the first one back here on the passenger side towards the firewall. So that'd be the first one you adjust if you're lined with number 1. And then you're going to rotate it clockwise and to the next number, which it should go in the firing order. And then you hit that cylinder. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust that. Actually, I might move this around to one of the front cylinders so that I can show you kind of how to adjust it easier. You don't necessarily have to adjust it the same order as the firing order. There's really no, as long as you're on the right cylinder where the crankshaft sprocket says, you're fine. The other thing too is you want to do this when the engine is cool. Today it's like 18 degrees in St. Louis, and it's been in the garage overnight with the heat off. The heat's on now, but the engine's completely cool. So you want to make sure the engine is cool. Honda says under 100 degrees, the engine itself. So we're well under that with this engine. So anyway, I'm going to turn this around so I can get one of the front cylinders, and then I'll show you what I do, adjusting the valves, and then I'll do the rest off camera, and then we'll put this back together and see if it clears our problem. Alright, so I got it lined up with number 6 down there. Since I can't really get the camera in there, I'm going to show you on my phone. Well, I thought about doing that. There's a number 6 right here. I took a picture of it. There's a notch right here, and that lines up with a little notch on this timing case. So once you get those lined up with whatever cylinder, so this is number 6. So of course we'll go 4, 5, 6. Number 6 is the last cylinder on this side. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust this one, and we'll go through the process on that. Alright, so we're going to check the intake first. The intakes are 08 to 09 thousandths. So I got a 8 thousandths feeler gauge. Now the ones that I like to use for doing valves are the ones that are angled like this. It's easier to get in there. So we got number 6 cylinder, which is right here. And we're going to slip it in between the rocker there and the valve and check for drag on it. Now this intake is actually pretty loose. There's almost no drag on this intake here. And this side, which like I said, usually on these Hondas it's the now on this intake valve, there's quite a bit of drag. This one might be just a tad too tight actually, and this one's too loose. And the reason we know this is the intake, because this is your intake manifold here. So these are your intake valves, and then the exhaust valves are down here, and that's the exhaust. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to tighten this one down a hair, and this one here, I don't know, this one here I think is okay. It's this one here that I'm more concerned about. There's no drag at all between this between the valve here. So this one I think is fine. You can slide it in there, and decent amount of drag back and forth. You don't want it where you can't move it, and you obviously don't want it where you can't get it in, and you don't want it where you get it in and there's no drag at all. There is some drag on this, so I'm going to leave this one alone, and I'm going to adjust this one. Now these are 10mm nuts, and then there's a small slot in the middle for a screwdriver. So I'm going to get the screwdriver and 10mm nut, and then we'll adjust that, and then we'll check the exhaust. And the exhaust is what I'm suspecting is going to be too tight on it. The spec on that is 11 to 13 thousandths, and I'm guessing that we won't be able to get those in there. So let me get the tools real quick, and then I'll adjust that one intake, and then we'll go for the exhaust. Alright, so all you need is 10mm wrench, and a screwdriver. And what you're doing is you're loosening this jam nut while you're holding the screw in the middle straight. I usually loosen it about a turn or so, and then I turn. Now that this valve was a little bit loose, so I usually turn about a quarter turn, and then I'll tighten the jam nut. And you have to hold the screw, this middle screw, straight while you tighten it. And then after you tighten it, double check it again and make sure, like right now, this one, I already adjusted this one. And this one's got a pretty decent amount of drag, about like the other one. Before it was real loose. And just make sure you can get your feeler gauge back in there. It's got a decent amount of drag. And these, they say, I think it's 14 foot-pounds, but basically just snug. You don't want to go nuts on them. So these two intakes are adjusted. The big thing is, you know, holding the center of it while you tighten down the jam nut. And you also want to, after you do that, double check it again, because sometimes it just moves just enough to tighten it up on you, or loosen, depending on, you know. But so anyway, the intakes are adjusted now. So now we're going to go for the exhaust. The exhaust is 11 to 13 thousandths of an inch. So I'm going to adjust these a little bit loose, as they tend to tighten up over time. So I'm going to adjust these for 13 thousandths of an inch. And my guess is they 11 or 13 won't even go in there, because usually, like I said before, these Hondas, my experience on these Hondas is the exhaust valves tighten up, and that's what starts causing all your issues. So I'm going to get, let's see, alright, I got 12 thousandths here, which is in between 11 and 13. And my guess is it's not going to go in there, so I'm going to check it real quick. I don't know if my hands will get in the way of the camera or not. The exhaust is a little harder to check on these because it's down at a bad angle, especially on the ends. I can't even get, you can't even move these valves backwards at all, and I can't even get the 12 thousandths to even come close to going in. I almost wonder if I can get anything in there. We try something smaller, just to see how much this is closed up. You don't really have to do this if you're just adjusting them, but I'm just curious on. Okay, so on this feeler set, my smallest one is 8 thousandths. I've got a feeling that ain't gonna go in there either. Check. Yeah, I can't even get 8 thousandths in there. So these are closed up pretty good. I'm not going to go look for a smaller one. We know that these are closed down pretty well. So I'm going to get the 13th back out, and we're just going to adjust it to 13 thousandths. Now you could go in the middle and do, it's 11 to 13 thousandths, but since this one is so tight, and they tend to tighten on the exhaust, I'm going to set it a little bit loose. You don't want to go loose enough to where you cause misfires the other way, but 13 thousandths will be within spec, so I'm going to make sure it's around there, and then we'll see what we got. I got a feeling we're going to have to go more than a quarter turn on these. Man, someone really, he's tightened up big time over time. They're only supposed to be, like I said, 14 foot-pounds, but these things are way tighter than that. Hopefully you can see this on the camera, I don't know. Gotta go in kind of an angle on these exhausts. And I'm going to need a smaller screwdriver, probably a stubby. They actually sell a tool you can buy to adjust these. I have it somewhere. I normally don't use it because, especially on the 4-cylinder, you can use it easier, but with these V6s where it's down in there, you can't really get it in there very well. So I think Power Built sells them, and they're pretty cheap, maybe 20 bucks or something. I've turned it about full turn, and I finally got in there and got a little bit of drag on it. So what you do once you get it in there, just drag it back and forth and turn down on it until it starts to get a decent amount of drag, and then you'll tighten it. The jam nut. I'm going to loosen this one up a little bit more so I had to turn so much. Like I said, you don't want your feeler gauge binding up or anything like that. So make sure you get it in there straight. That feels pretty good. So I'm going to turn, like I said, you hold the center down with the screwdriver, and then go ahead and tighten that jam nut until it's snug. And it will try to adjust the valve when you tighten it. So usually you'll try to tighten it some more. So you have to hold it with the screwdriver. So we still got pretty good drag on it. I can take it out and put it in, and there is drag on it, but it's not too tight. So yeah, I think that's pretty good. Before we couldn't even get this in there. So I feel pretty comfortable with that. Give it one final torque. And then go on to the next one, right next to it. There's two valves per, well, there's 4 valves per cylinder, two intake and 2 exhaust valves per cylinder. So you're going to have to do it twice, one on each one. Alright, so that's pretty much it. That's how you do it. Now I'm going to adjust, I have to adjust this one still. I guess I can't really get in and show you what I'm doing, but explain it to you as best I can. So once this one's adjusted, you'll turn the engine and wait for the next cylinder to come up, and whatever cylinder that is on the sprocket, that's the one that you adjust. So anyway, I'm going to go through and do that on all these, and then we'll start putting this back together, clear the codes, and see how she runs. Alright, I realized the camera was kind of far away when I did this. When you're adjusting the valves, like there's the nut, this is the jam nut, and then this is the actual adjuster part that goes down, presses down against the valve. Now you're going to hold that with a screwdriver, loosen this, run your feeler gauge back and forth until you can feel a little bit of drag, and then tighten it down. A lot of times when you tighten these down, if you don't hold them good, they'll either tighten or loosen again, so you got to keep, you may have to do it 2 or 3 times to get the right feel for it. And that's the other thing, a lot of this is feel, just a lot of experience. I can tell where they need to be, but you want like a slight drag on it, and you can turn it down to where it stops dragging and then kind of back it off until you can go back and forth, and then set it there. You want to be able to get the feeler gauge in between the valve and the rocker and have a slight drag. So I didn't want to gloss over that. I wanted to show you that up close. This is what you're adjusting. Again, the ones towards the lower intake are your intake, and the ones on the bottom are your exhaust. And on this engine here, every single exhaust valve was tight. Not one of them could I get the feeler gauge under, and actually I had to back all of them off quite a bit to get the feeler gauge in there. On the intake, I had 2 that were loose. They weren't real far off, but they were enough to where I wanted them to drag a little more, so I went ahead and tightened those 2 down. But as far as the intake goes, there was only 2 out of 12 that were just slightly loose. I could almost probably left them, but I wanted to, if I'm already in here, you want to just do it right. So I already got the valve cover off on the back, or on in the back, but I wanted to show that before I put the valve cover back on this. And like I said, every single exhaust valve on this engine was tight, like super tight. So that's another reason why you want to adjust these about every 100. I think Honda says about every 120, 130,000, somewhere in there. I know people, it's one of those things, it's kind of expensive to get down to the shop. People let it go. But it's not, it's better to just go ahead and take care of it, keep the engine running good, avoid possible burnt valves. And, you might pick up a little bit of gas mileage. It should idle a little bit better. And in this case, we'll probably lose our misfires. We had them on all 6, and they were instant. I would clear the codes, and they would come back almost instantly. So we'll find out pretty quick once I get this valve cover wrong and get everything back together if we fixed it. I feel pretty good about it. I mean, regardless, it needed to be done. And that's the thing with something like this, that someone's already went in and changed a whole bunch of stuff. If the valves haven't been adjusted on the Honda and you got multiple fire cylinders and it's not the fuel injectors, the coils and all that, it's good just to go in and adjust these out. It needs to be done anyway if it hasn't been done. And that way you're starting at a steady base. And then we can go in if it's still setting off multiple misfire, multiple cylinder misfires, we'll go in and take a closer look at it. But at least now we can eliminate this. It needed to be done anyway, and I have a pretty strong feeling it's going to fix it anyway. So we'll see. I'm going to go ahead and finish putting all this back together, and then we'll clear the codes and take it for a ride and see what happens with it. All right, so it's back together and running. I cleared the codes on it, and they have not came back yet. Normally they would come back almost instantly, and it would idle real rough. And if you rev it up, it would try to die until it settled down a little bit. It's not doing any of that. So we're going to go take it out for a test drive real quick and make sure none of the codes come back, and then this should be good to go. But it's running noticeably better, so I think it's fixed. But of course we'll go drive it and verify that real quick. All right, now that it's daylight savings time, I'm finishing my days on the dark. Kind of sucks, but anyway, I just took it out for about 20-30 minutes. No check engine light anywhere, and there's nothing on the scanner. No trouble codes. So that's just a tale. That's a tale of caution there. If you have a Honda and you got multiple cylinder misfires, and you've already tried to change the coil packs and injectors and all that stuff, don't overlook the valves on these, because they need to be adjusted about every 120,000 or so. And if it get real bad, you let it go too long, you can burn the valve, and then you got to pull the head off and all that. I didn't think this one was to that level yet, because it wasn't misfiring under load or when you're driving it. It just had kind of a rough idle, and then it would kind of die when it was cold. And I noticed if you revved it up at idle, when it came back down off the higher RPM, it would stumble and sometimes want to die. And now it's not doing any of that. Real smooth coming back down. You see right there, it just went right back down to idle perfect. So if you're having symptoms like that, definitely check your valves, especially if you know they haven't been changed in a while, or checked in a while. Not changed, but haven't been adjusted in a while. If you've never done it, make sure that you study up on it a little bit. You don't want to have them too loose or too tight. It's kind of a feel thing. If you've been I've been adjusting valves for a long time, so I can go by feel. But it's not like a black magic or anything. You just put a feeler gauge in there, make sure you get a little bit of drag, and then tighten it down. So anyway, that's about it on this one. I'm going to go on to the next one. I actually got a couple other Hondas that need their valves adjusted real soon. So I might put out a few more videos. One's on a K24 engine, the 4-cylinder, and then there's one that I got to do on a older 2002, I think, Accord. So I'll probably have those videos coming up soon if you have one of those vehicles. So I appreciate you watching. Please like and subscribe on Facebook and YouTube. We're going to go ahead and call him and get this Hoopty back to the owner. We'll see you on the next one, and God bless. Thanks for watching.